Welcome back, accomplices, and happy Father's Day to all you dads out there with human and fur babies. Because we did a Killer Moms episode, of course we had to do a Killer Dads.
We can't let the moms have all the fun. Now, you may remember we did cover all the reasons why parents kill their children in episode 6, but just to recap, nearly 500 kids are killed by their parents each year. Of those, roughly 57% are killed by their father. Only 10% of the victims were killed by their step-parents. That means 90% of the victims were the biological sons or daughters of the killer. Some parents use personal weapons to beat, choke, or drown victims in the majority of cases involving underage kids. If the victims were adults, parents used guns in 72% of such killings. So, of course, true to our norm, we can't ever pick just one or two cases to present, so we have a list of some killer dads that deserve a mention.
First one up is Josh Powell. So I am addicted to this whole case, but it always ends with me being a weeping mess. One day, I hope we can actually cover this as a full-length episode, but I need to learn how to not be a blubbering idiot before that happens. Until then, we do want to briefly mention it. On the morning of February 5th, 2012, a social worker took brothers Charlie Powell, who was 7, and Braden Powell, who was 5, to see their father. It was supposed to be a supervised visit with Josh Powell, the dad in question, who remained a person of interest in the 2009 disappearance of Susan Powell, the boys' mother. Instead, Josh reportedly rushed the kids inside and pushed the social worker out of the house. While the social worker called 911 for backup, Josh struck Charlie and Braden in their heads with a hatchet and then set off an explosion that blew up the entire residence. All 3 Powells died in the detonation. Searchers have never turned up Susan Powell's body, and Josh has never been charged with any foul play. The missing mom's family, however, believes entirely that he killed her, and investigators continually eyeballed him. Susan's parents, as a result, obtained custody of Charlie and Braden until he took those 2 boys away from them and everyone and everything else forever. Next up, we have Gregory Green. Gregory V. Green killed his entire family and then called 911 to turn himself in. Twice. The 49-year-old's first murder occurred in 1991 when he fatally stabbed his wife, who was 6 months pregnant. Green did 16 years behind bars for that homicide and worked with a pastor to get paroled. After getting out, Green married Faith Allen, the pastor's daughter. At the time, Faith had 2 children from a previous relationship. She went on to have another son and daughter with Green. On September 21st, 2016, Green murdered the couple's young daughters, Coy, 5, and Kaylee, 4, by asphyxiating them with carbon monoxide inside the family's car. He then restrained and fatally shot his stepchildren, Chadney Allen Jr., 19, and Kara Allen, 17. On top of that, Green tied Faith to a chair, slashed her throat, and shot her. Somehow, she survived. Earlier in the year, Faith had accused Green of domestic violence. She had tried and failed to serve him with divorce papers. She had also been denied a restraining order against him. As noted, Green called the cops himself. In March 2017, he was sentenced to a minimum of 47 years behind bars. The last one that I have for you is Gerardo Ordaz. All hell broke loose at the St. John the Baptist Catholic Church on November 21st, 2016. That's when 42-year-old Gerardo Mendoza Ordaz reportedly burst into the house of worship and proceeded to drown Maria Jose Ordaz Chavarria, his 2-year-old daughter, in the church's baptismal font. The deranged dad then bolted outside and later turned up naked in the parking lot of the Healdsburg police station, allegedly screaming, "Police, help me." Officers arrested Ordaz on the spot. He has since been charged with 1 count of murder and felony assault on a child, as well as 1 misdemeanor count of cruelty to a child. The final charge stems from Ordaz's 9-year-old son being on hand to watch his father murder his sister.
We also have Anthony Sanders. In April 2016, computer gaming obsessive Anthony Michael Sanders, age 31, exploded in rage at his 2-year-old daughter, Ellie. Her transgression? Distracting Sanders from some online game. The huge father then reportedly beat and bit Ellie before finally smothering her against the floor. Afterward, Sanders allegedly put Ellie's body in her bed. Later on, Ellie's 5-year-old brother attempted to wake her up, but said she wasn't moving. Sanders' arrest affidavit states that doctors discovered fresh wounds all over the child, including raccoon eye bruises around her eyes, blood behind her ears, and 2 adult-size bite marks on her back. Police had previously arrested Sanders in 2011 for choking his girlfriend. He presently faces capital murder charges for killing his daughter. We also have a famous one for you, too. In June 2007, 40-year-old professional wrestler Chris Benoit strangled his 43-year-old wife, Nancy, and suffocated his 7-year-old son, Daniel, before hanging himself from a weight machine in the basement of the family's Fayetteville, Georgia home. Law enforcement discovered the family's bodies on June 25, 2007, after no one had been able to get in touch with Chris or Nancy for a number of days. Investigators found Bibles next to the victims' bodies, and a search of Chris Benoit's computer led them to believe he may have tried to resuscitate his son after killing him. Such speculation has persisted regarding why Benoit murdered his wife and child before ending his own life. Following his death, scans of Benoit's brain revealed severe damage caused by concussions suffered during his long wrestling career. Other tests conducted on Benoit's brain tissue revealed severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy, known as CTE, and damage to all 4 lobes of the brain and brain stem. Doctors concluded that repeated concussions can lead to dementia, which can contribute to severe behavioral problems. However, toxicology tests revealed steroids in Benoit's system at the time of his death, causing some to believe he may have murdered his family as a result of roid rage. Benoit's exact motives have never been revealed. And our Father of the Year award goes to none other than Chris Watts. We all know about Chris Watts, but in case you forgot, in August 2018, Chris Watts' pregnant wife, Shannon, and their 2 young daughters went missing. When news crews arrived at the Watts home to interview Chris, they described him as aloof and cavalier, which immediately raised the public's and authorities' suspicions. Watts claimed his wife returned home from a business trip, then promptly disappeared with their children. He admitted they had had an emotional conversation the night before she left, but confirmed it was nothing too serious. He even went as far to tell an officer, "I couldn't sleep at all last night," and that he missed my children throwing chicken nuggets at me, honestly, last night, hours after he had killed them. Further investigation uncovered Shannon's body buried in a shallow grave, and authorities found the bodies of Bella and Celeste placed in a tank on the oil field outside of Denver where Chris Watts worked. Records showed the family was deeply in debt, having declared bankruptcy a few years prior to the murders. The week after Watts' televised interview, when his father flew to town allegedly to confront him, the senior Watts reportedly convinced his son to turn himself into the authorities. Watts made a complete confession on August 16, 2018. He was charged with 3 counts of murder. On November 6, 2018, Watts pled guilty to 9 charges. In exchange for his guilty plea, he was spared the death penalty. And on November 19, 2018, he was sentenced to 5 life sentences, 3 consecutive and 2 concurrent, with no parole.
After all that, we still have our star cases to present because I kicked the story off last week. Tara gets to go first.
Oh, lucky me. All right, so I'm going to present the case of Valiree Jackson, and I just want to pre-apologize if I get a little emotional. This story is very close to me as I was friends with Valiree. We met in the 2nd grade and quickly became friends. That was actually the only year that we went to school together because her family ended up moving from the town that we lived in to the bigger city of Spokane. So I was sad when she moved away with her dad the following year. And I still remember the first time I saw her picture flash across my TV screen and hearing the reporter state that she was missing. It wasn't long after that there was confirmation that her body had been found and I would never see my friend again. Writing this story has dug up a lot of feelings and emotions that I buried over 20 years ago. So again, I'm sorry if I get a little emotional. But at the same time, I'm not sorry because she was my friend. So let's get into it. On October 18th, 1999, 34-year-old Brad Jackson could not have imagined he was about to face a parent's greatest fear. His 9-year-old daughter, Valiree, was ready for school and waiting for her dad to switch the laundry so he could walk her to school. Just a few minutes later, when Brad went outside to get Valiree, he couldn't find her. His concern was increased when he found her backpack by their front doorstep, so he began asking neighbors if they'd seen her, but no one had. The distraught father called 911 in tears. Everyone knew and loved the little girl with distinctive red hair and a bright smile. The close-knit community immediately rallied together, not only to help police search for Valiree, but also to comfort Brad, who seemed genuinely devastated. Despite dozens of searchers looking in an ever-widening area, there were no signs of Valiree. The sleepy town outside Spokane, Washington feared the worst. A stranger from outside the community was preying on their children. Tips poured in as neighbors reported sightings of suspicious strangers. Police feared they were going to have a difficult time solving an abduction by a stranger. Statistically, it is the most challenging type of case to solve. Valiree's mother had her own sordid tale, as she was also missing. The last person to see Roseanne Pleasant before she went missing was Brad. She was reportedly seen at a corner store in Spokane on September 29th, 1992. She was a reported drug addict, and Valiree was just 2 years old when her mother vanished. 1 week before her disappearance, Roseanne was said to have called her brother, who lived in Arizona, and told him she was concerned for her safety. She reportedly planned on taking 3 of her 4 children and moving somewhere down south, but sadly, that would never occur. Those close to Roseanne didn't believe she'd simply abandon her young daughter. Instead, they suspected something devious might have been at play, and they pointed the finger at Brad. But there was little to no evidence to support their claim, aside from Brad being arrested at least once for hitting her. Sadly, Roseanne was listed as a missing person. Police wanted to consider if Roseanne was still alive, and if she was, maybe she was sober and wanted to reconnect with her daughter. Did Valiree's mother abduct her, or is Brad himself behind his daughter's disappearance? Brad and Valiree lived with Brad's parents, but his mother had already left for work on the morning Valiree went missing. As investigators searched the Jackson home and delved into Brad's relationships, they started to uncover troubling clues about Valiree's home life. Police had a gut feeling that Brad was connected to Valiree's disappearance, but they lacked sufficient evidence to charge him. Would additional evidence implicate Brad in Valiree's disappearance? Was Valiree still alive? Or would the investigation point police to a more sinister outcome? When the Jackson home was searched, 2 red pubic hairs were found in Valiree's bed, along with a few drops of blood from her pillowcase. The pubic hairs were found to be similar to Brad's, but investigators couldn't say for sure how they got there. As for the blood, Valiree was prone to nosebleeds. However, it was odd that there were no tissues, cotton balls, or anything else one might expect to find when trying to stop a nosebleed. Investigators also uncovered that Valiree had been prescribed the antidepressant Paxil. Valiree was described as a bright, loving child, but because she reportedly regularly fought with Brad's girlfriend, Danette Schroeder, she was labeled a menace. So Valiree had actually told me once at school when Danette and Brad had come into our class to drop off cupcakes for Valiree's birthday that she didn't like Danette at all because she was mean to her and she wanted her dad to leave her, which was super sad.
Yeah.
And she was really mean.
Was. And is.
Is, yeah. Almost 2 weeks had passed since Valiree's disappearance, and still there were no leads. Brad continued to play the part of a worried father, making public pleas for Valiree's return and raising reward money. But he was also growing increasingly paranoid that he was a suspect. He believed he was being followed by the media and nosy neighbors. As it turns out, he was being followed, just not how he thought. When police searched Brad's car and truck, they had secretly placed a GPS tracker in both vehicles. Police then took advantage of Brad's paranoia and told him not only did they know he killed Valiree, but they were going to find her body. They warned him that his days as a free man were numbered. Brad fell for their bluff and led police straight to Valiree's body, buried in a remote logging site 60 miles away from his home. She had been moved from one shallow grave in another location miles away. There was no question that Brad had hastily disposed of his little girl.
So sad.
When confronted, Brad admitted to killing his daughter. However, he reportedly claimed that it was an accident. He stated that Valiree accidentally overdosed on her Paxil prescription. Brad claimed he didn't know what to do after Valiree died. He panicked and decided to cover up her death. Police weren't convinced of his story and speculated that Brad smothered his daughter to death. An autopsy report revealed that there was bruising around Valiree's nose and mouth. It is believed by authorities that Brad killed Valiree so he could have a free life with Danette Schroeder. The police tracker on his vehicle showed that he was prone to driving back and forth past Schroeder's home. When he was arrested, one of his phone calls was to Schroeder, and during the conversation, he reportedly asked her to marry him. She quickly declined, and during his trial, she testified that she had no knowledge of Valiree's death, which, in all honesty, I personally don't believe one bit, and I feel like she also has something to do with it. It's hard to feel sympathy for a woman who couldn't get along with a child and instead had convinced that child's father to put her on prescription medication for depression. This woman's a fucking monster who shouldn't be allowed to be around children, yet somehow she's a teacher and she's a fucking bully. We have a friend whose daughter's in her class, and she's been bullying her all year, calling her names, arguing with her. I'm not even kidding. It's so bad that this bitch was brought up in front of the school board and is resigning as a full-time teacher, but still plans to teach music class a few times a week. And I really hope that after the investigation they have going on with her, she is fired. I still see her around town sometimes, so I badly want to give her a piece of my mind. Sorry about that rant. Valiree Jackson was murdered 12 days after her 9th birthday. A jury found Brad Jackson guilty of first-degree murder in October of 2000 and sentenced him to 56 years in prison. On September 11th, 2003, the state of Washington Supreme Court denied Jackson's motion for a new trial and reaffirmed his conviction. In 2019, he lost another court action. Jackson is currently confined to the Mayo Correctional Institution in Mayo, Florida. If he is still alive when his release date is set, he would be released in late 2056 when he's 91 years old. As for Roseanne Pleasant, she has never been found, nor was Jackson formally charged with her death. Her brother believes that Jackson buried Roseanne in the foundations of one of the construction sites he worked at. And that's my case.
So, can we talk about that girlfriend for a second?
Oh, yes. The one I'm very heated about?
Yes, that one.
Yeah. She's awful. I can't believe she's a teacher.
Yeah, I can't believe either.
Yeah.
We've heard the stories.
Yeah.
It's one of our good friends. Her daughter's in her class, and this woman, I don't even know what to say. She is something.
Like I said, she's a monster.
She really is.
Well, that wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. So, Shayna, you're next.
As I kind of mentioned before, I am a giant crybaby when it comes to cases about murdering children. With that being said, this one is not super long, but it's more about the dad's history and the events that happened after the murder rather than the details of the murder itself. So I'm sorry if that bothers any of you, but I don't feel like bawling my eyes out. Ryan Lawrence was the youngest of 4 children and graduated from high school in 2009.
Yeah, that's when we graduated.
Yeah. The year before was his first encounter with the pain of cancer. His mother, Mary Lawrence, died in July 2008 from kidney cancer. Ryan went on to take 2 semesters at Monroe Community College in 2009 and 2010, but dropped out. He took 2 more classes at Onondaga Community College in 2011. Morgan Forster graduated from high school in 2011. She sang in the school choir, and after graduation, started working at the Destiny USA Mall in Syracuse, New York, where she met Ryan Lawrence. They both worked on and off at a tea store. Morgan worked at 2 clothing stores as well, and Ryan also worked at a restaurant, a grocery store, and delivered newspapers for the Post-Standard. They shared a love of the outdoors. Morgan did nature photography, and Ryan loved hiking and camping. They were inseparable and always together. They lived together and shared a single car. Morgan became pregnant while she and Ryan were dating, and soon after finding out, the couple got married. Maddox Mary Lawrence was born on April 24th, 2014. When Ryan Lawrence did the morning pastry deliveries around Syracuse, baby Maddox went with him. He'd never leave her in the car, carrying her with one arm and the boxes of sweets with the other. Before Maddox's first birthday, the couple noticed that one of her wide brown eyes was turning darker. They took her in, and she was diagnosed with a rare form of eye cancer in her retina called retinoblastoma.
Oh, no.
For months, both parents drove the little girl to a cancer center in New York City, where Maddox had undergone 4 of 8 treatments. There, she sat for intense chemotherapy that targeted the tumor in her eye and the blood vessels feeding it. The treatments lasted as long as 6 hours, which I cannot imagine trying to keep
That poor baby.
a 1-year-old still and calm
They
for
probably
6
strap
hours.
her down.
Yeah, which is just
So
terrible.
traumatic.
Yeah.
Oh, poor girl.
So the 2 young parents were relying on a series of low-wage jobs, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, put them under a great deal of stress and struggling financially to pay for the additional hospital bills.
Take her to St. Jude's.
On Saturday, February 20th, 2016, Ryan and Maddox dropped Morgan off for her shift at the mall around 4 p.m. She expected them to pick her back up around 10 p.m., but that never happened. Instead, Ryan Lawrence left the car for his wife with the keys in it. When she arrived back at their home in Syracuse's Valley neighborhood, she found that Ryan had left an 8-minute video for his wife in which he says, "Morgan, I love you, but I can't do this anymore. I want you to have the life that you deserve." He says that Max is gone. I took Max. Max was their nickname for Maddox. He also left a note for his wife in which he indicated he might harm his daughter and himself. Police issued an Amber Alert the next morning, February 21st, and began searching the inner harbor of Syracuse and Baldwinsville, which is Ryan's hometown and only about 10 miles northwest of Syracuse.
The next morning?
Yeah, well, because at this point, she got off work at 10 p.m.
Yeah.
and got home, so it would have been late. So, I mean, you'd think they'd issue it right away, but I guess.
Yeah.
You had to wait till detectives got in? I don't know. For more than 2 days, highway signs, phones, and televisions flashed the alert. Media outlets described the child's clothing: a white shirt with brown puppies and a pink collar, a gray hat with pom-poms, a pink coat with a blue interior. When state police issued the Amber Alert, investigators had added a description of Lawrence as emotionally unstable with a history of mental illness. This was because Syracuse police had been called to deal with Lawrence more than once, but he was never arrested as a result of those incidents. So the investigators, I guess, took that as him having a history of mental illness. But the police have never made a comment on those prior visits, so no one is able to confirm that that is what the calls were for. On the second day of the search, Morgan Lawrence spoke at a Syracuse Police Department news conference. She looked out at a sea of television cameras and squinted into the light, holding the sides of the podium as if it was holding her up. The 23-year-old's parents stood a few feet away, flanked by police officers. "If you're listening, please just bring Maddox home. Maddox, I love you, honey," Morgan said through tears. "Ryan, please, just please call. We just want to know that the both of you are safe." But Maddox was already dead. As the temperatures dipped into the low 20s on Monday, February 22nd, Ryan Lawrence went into the Thrifty Shopper on Downer Street in Baldwinsville, where he had shopped before. He wore a wig, hat, bandana, and sunglasses. A former employee who happened to be in the store recognized Lawrence despite his disguise. She followed him out of the store and called 911. Police found him walking on a nearby street and took him into custody. When Lawrence was picked up by police, he had camping gear in his backpack, a book on how to avoid capture, and he smelled like campfire smoke. At first, Ryan Lawrence gave police a fake name he didn't even know how to spell and date of birth that didn't match his age. He soon admitted who he was, and detectives questioned Lawrence for hours. When asked where they could find Maddox, Lawrence said, "She's in a better place." In the police interview, Ryan began with claiming he had given Maddox to a couple named Chris and Tyler, who fled to Bolivia. He claimed that he had set up to meet with them over the phone, but his phone records showed no unknown numbers. He also claimed that Chris and Tyler had watched the baby grow up through Morgan's Facebook page, but her page was private and the couple were not her friends on there. In the end, he finally brought police to the wooded area where he killed his daughter. He then led them to where he dumped her little body. The dive team searched the water, and shortly after noon on February 23rd, nearly 3 days after she was killed, Maddox's body was pulled from Onondaga Creek. Lawrence admitted hitting his daughter with a wooden bat, putting the 21-month-old girl's body in a fire pit with the bat, and burning them for hours. He then took Maddox's charred remains and tied them to a cinder block before dropping them into the water. Lawrence indicated to police that before killing Maddox, he'd been jealous that she'd been taking his wife's attention from him. Lawrence said he was suffering from a psychotic disorder brought on by what he described as a growing storm in his head. It had battered him with a barrage of problems he said he couldn't solve. He was working at dead-end jobs, unable to support his wife and child. He had a suspended driver's license and a $1,000 fine he couldn't pay. He was driving an uninsured car. His marriage was in trouble. He was still, 8 years later, despondent over the death of his mother. 2 psychiatrists who examined Lawrence found he did not have a mental illness. One cited his careful planning before the murder as proof. Lawrence said in the interview that his plan was to make everyone think he and Maddox had simply run away. He was going to kill his daughter, then get far away, and kill himself, he said. That's why he'd gotten all that equipment. He even got a can of spray paint to change the color of his skin.
What? Trying to go blackface?
I was like, green's a natural color, right?
Yeah. Avatar.
He thought ahead enough to bring a fishing pole, camping gear, food, a tent, and a mosquito net to make his getaway. He brought a sheet of plastic to the murder scene to catch blood splatter. All of that jibes with someone who understood his conduct was wrong, according to a report by psychiatrist Dr. James Knoll. Lawrence said he was planning to kill himself, but needed all that stuff to survive long enough so he could get to the Ohio River, where he hoped his body would float all the way to the Caribbean. That's where his mother's ashes were dispersed in 2008.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
If he wanted to kill himself, he could have done it without ending Maddox's life. His explanation for not doing that, he didn't want Maddox raised without a father. He'd thought about solving all his troubles by running away with Maddox and letting her live, but he didn't want his daughter to be raised without a mother. So I guess his solution was not to raise the daughter at all. I was trying to save Maddox, Lawrence said. I was trying to save my wife. I was trying to save my family from hurt, from struggle. In the most selfish act I've ever done, I thought irrationally that it was going to be the most selfless thing I've ever done. Dr. Knoll's report found he wasn't mentally ill, nor had a psychotic disorder of any kind. Lawrence has a borderline and antisocial personality disorder. The disorder does not substantially impair perception. Lawrence had symptoms of non-psychotic mental illness, but not enough to make a diagnosis of a major mental disorder. Lawrence had tunnel vision on the day of the murder, zeroing in on how to resolve his worry that Maddox would suffer the same tortured emotions of her father. He said Lawrence's condition could fit the definition of a mental disease, but that idea falters with the evidence that Lawrence went to elaborate lengths to conceal what he'd done. Lawrence told Dr. Knoll that he'd burned the body to reduce his chance of being prosecuted for murder. I knew that if I was caught, I would be put into jail and I wouldn't be able to die the way I wanted to. Lawrence said he planned to eventually commit suicide by starving himself, getting an infection, or simply succumbing to the elements. Knoll expressed doubt about that because the items Lawrence took with him contradicted the claim, and he never mentioned to the police that he'd planned to take his own life. Lawrence told Noel that he'd stolen from every company he ever worked for, including stealing money straight from the cash register, blaming his addiction to adrenaline. He said he would jump off bridges into rivers as well to also get that rush. He told Noel of a need to fill his dull life with high stress through ill-conceived decisions. In the year before the murder, Lawrence choked his own dog to death.
Oh my God.
Yeah. The dog, Trooper, had become ill and needed to be euthanized, but Lawrence couldn't afford to have a veterinarian do it. Lawrence took the dog to a favorite place of theirs in the woods, tried to comfort her, then compressed her airway until she died.
It's not even quick. If you didn't want them to suffer, shoot them.
Yeah.
Sorry. Continue.
I completely agree. Lawrence said the signs of a psychotic disorder were there from his childhood. He used to mutilate himself by burning his skin with hot metal, incense, and other objects.
Well, we all did that.
It started when he was 14, when his parents separated, and got worse after his mother died 2 years later. He has a zodiac sign he burned onto the back of his hand. After his mother's death, he burned a heart onto his chest with incense. On his legs, Lawrence has scars from a broken bottle that he'd heated and burned into his skin.
Okay, we didn't take it that far. But I did used to, I would light the Bic lighter and wait for it to get really hot, and then it would leave a smiley face.
Cute. I never knew that. I wasn't a smoker in high school. I was a good kid. That's why I didn't like you.
I was the cool kid.
That's why you didn't like me.
I just didn't like you because you didn't like me, so it was like a mutual dislike. Because I didn't want to be left out.
Lawrence was a heavy drug user from age 16 to 20. He used LSD, cocaine, mushrooms, marijuana, ketamine, and ecstasy. But he claimed that he hadn't used any drugs for a week before the murder. He told psychiatrists that he'd heard his dead mother, Mary, tell him that he should give Maddox to her so she could take care of the girl.
Yeah, LSD will do that to you. Ketamine, ecstasy, eek.
Devil's lettuce.
Hey,
It's
now.
a rough run. Rough run.
Yeah, it's marijuana.
The old bouncer.
The gateway drug. Gateway to my refrigerator. I like snacks.
Same. At first, he said he'd asked himself what his mother would tell him to do. That was a week before the murder. When asked if he'd heard her voice on the day of the murder, Lawrence said, "Yeah, I heard what I thought was my mom that day. She said, 'Let me take care of her. Give her to me.' And then I said, 'No, I want to take care of her. This is my job.'"
Oh, he took care of her all right.
He claimed the voice also said, "You're selfish for keeping Max here while you're suffering, while Morgan's suffering." He later said he knows now that he never heard his mother's voice and that she'd never want him to harm her granddaughter. In an interview, Lawrence said he was responsible for Maddox's death, acknowledging that he was the killer, but said he was someone else that day, of course, when nothing else works. "Wasn't me, I swear." That wasn't me, that was Patricia.
That wasn't me, that was Patricia. I love that movie.
Dr. Knoll said people with Lawrence's personality disorder tend to attribute their unacceptable feelings to other people. In other words, it's always someone else's fault.
Yes.
Ryan Lawrence pleaded guilty to first-degree murder on September 15th, admitting to killing his baby daughter, Maddox, and dumping her body in the Inner Harbor in Syracuse. At sentencing, County Court Judge Anthony Alloy delivered his verdict. "Mr. Lawrence, based on the facts and circumstances of this case, it is my opinion that you deserve to spend the rest of your life in prison for what you have done." Alloy then officially announced the agreed-upon punishment, 25 years to life in prison. A parole board will not consider his release until he is at least 49 years old. At his sentencing, Morgan Lawrence spoke. "I've been forced against my will out of motherhood. Knowing her death was at the hands of a man who I once loved and trusted with our lives shakes me to the core." In June 2017, the New York Senate passed a bill named Maddox's Law. It would make murdering a child under the age of 13 a first-degree murder. The law would create a new offense under the first-degree murder statute, allowing defendants accused of murdering children under 13 to face the same charge as those accused of murdering a police officer, a correctional facility employee, judge, firefighter, emergency medical technician, ambulance driver, paramedic, physician, and registered nurse. The law would also mean those convicted under the new offense could be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Good.
Yeah.
That's so sad. And she beat the cancer?
She beat cancer, and she ended up killing because of her dad, who had essentially helped save her life.
You would think if it was that strenuous to go through that, like, why not just let the cancer kill her?
Yeah. Why continue to take her?
Why fork out all that money and do all that treatment and everything?
Just to end up killing her.
Just to kill her. It's so sad. Although these crimes are quite heinous and it's hard to justify a parent killing their own child, there is one dad whose case I followed when it happened. And in all honesty, those kids, who were adults at the time, kind of had it coming. A 70-year-old Michael League says he'll regret what he did the rest of his life. In March of 2013, Michael and his wife returned home when they found their daughter allegedly tried to attack her brother with a knife. Michael states, "My wife was about to have a nervous breakdown, and I couldn't take it anymore. I snapped." That night, as his daughter, Danielle, 43, and son, Dennis, 46, lay sleeping in the League home, he shot each one of them in the head. He then called 911, stating, "I just committed a father's worst sin. I just shot my daughter in the head and my son in the head." He went on to tell the dispatcher that drugs had plagued his family. He said, quote, "It's all because of alcohol and drugs. It tore our family apart." Michael was arrested, and when the time came, he pled guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder. League came into court teary-eyed and not looking at his family, who had gathered in his defense. He addressed the court and stated, "I loved my children when they were born. I love them now, and I will always love them no matter what happened." Family and friends testified that the killings came after years of nonstop verbal abuse and pilfering of League's bank account and prescription medications by the two, fueled by drugs and alcohol. They called it a living hell. They say police had responded to the home dozens of times. Dennis League's daughter, Kayla, told the court, "One day he'd be my dad, and the next day he wouldn't. I didn't understand it was alcohol, and it just scared me growing up." She told the judge she doesn't want her grandfather to serve any prison time, even though he killed her father. "I don't think he should be in here or any of this. He couldn't take it, and I just want him back home." Michael League's wife, Joanne, echoed the sentiment. "I would hope he would show leniency," she said. "We have to live with this for the rest of our lives, so the sentence is already there permanently." The prosecutor wanted a 15-year sentence for each murder to run one after the other. Judge Gerald Johnson said murder is wrong, but the children provoked it. He handed down a 5-year total sentence, and at the time of the conviction, Michael League had already served nearly a year in jail, and with time off for good behavior, he would be released 3 years later. League came into the court anguished, but left with hope as his family yelled, "We love you, Michael." So, there's that. He also lives in Puyallup, Washington. Yeah.
Hey-o.
Hey-o.
Well, happy Father's Day to those outstanding dads, and to all the other dads who haven't murdered their children.
Yes, happy Father's Day.
Yet.
That escalated quickly.
As always, we want to hear from you, so hit us up on Facebook at Thick Thighs and Murder Vibes Community, or on Instagram at Thick Thighs Murder Vibes. Like, follow, and share the shit out of it to all your friends and family. Or you can always email us at thickthighsmurdervibes@gmail.com.
And with next week being the last week of Pride Month, we're doing a Pride episode with cases involving individuals in the LGBTQ community. We understand that it may be a very difficult episode to stomach, but we are going to do our best to pay tribute to those who lost their lives simply for being proud of who they are. So come back next week for the darker side of Pride. Bye!